I'm now delighted to introduce Sussan Babaie. Sussan is Professor of the Arts of Iran and Islam at the Courtauld Institute of Art. Before coming to London, Sussan taught at Smith College, the University of Michigan, and the Institut für Kunstgeschichte at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. She has also curated many exhibitions, including Strolling in Isfahan at Harvard University and Persian drawings in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I'm going to hand over to Sussan right now.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I am delighted to be here, and thank you, Amanda, for your kind introductions. Really an honor to be in this company, and you have to forgive me if I am asking for us to look closely. I know you're all very close lookers, so to speak. So I'm going to share my screen and hope that all is good. Can everyone see my screen? I assume you can, right? Oh. Okay, so I have taken this as an opportunity to, as a trustee of the Athena Art Foundation, and as someone with, like the rest of you, with passionate intention to preserve art history of the pre-modern era to the best of our abilities, and teaching at the Courtauld, even though we do have art history taught that is of the material from the pre-modern period, we still have to fight to preserve what is historical in the process. The talk is actually simply inspired by the incredible exhibition Epic Iran at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which I hope you have seen or else will have a chance to see. It's probably the solution or the healing balm after a year and a half of being stuck at home and behind scenes of flatness, basically. And it's a magnificent exhibition in the selection of the objects and in the incredible claim that it puts. It's not a false claim, it's a real historical one, of the deep history of cultural production of consequence from the Iranian plateau. And I'm grateful to Ina Sadikhani, whose passion is really this exhibition, for offering me high resolution images of a folio from the Book of Kings, the Shanahme, of which a detail is on the screen and has been the advertising pitch for us in general. So what I'd like to do is use this as a hook to speak about 16th century art from elsewhere, if you will, and to point to the fact that that elsewhere, in fact, was very much central to a vast Eurasian network of trade and cultural and technological exchanges. And this is meant to be an excuse to closely look at a couple of pages. Really, that's my focus. And I would like to use this to situate one of these wonderful, really artistic products of the 16th century. And I start with this one. I hope that you can see the details. These are the best images I could get a hold of, and it's very difficult to, in fact, talk about these images and look at them and teach about them through the lens of reproductions and digital media. Nonetheless, I'd like to point to the fact that the page is one of hundreds of a magnificent manuscript of the Shanahme, a copy of the Shanahme that was made for Shah Tahmasp, the second Safavid ruler, in the workshops, the atelier, scriptorium, library of the royal household in the city of Tabriz in northwestern Iran. The page I'm showing you is an extraordinary painting in the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, but one amongst many by a group of artists, amongst whom the most famous I have chosen a few pages of to share with you. I want to point out to the size of this page, which is 47 by 32 centimeters, and to bring to your attention the incredible minuteness of the details that fill this page and this painting, which looks like it is floating above the folio of speckled, gold speckled paper, but also goes under and above and below the text boxes as we see here. This is one of the, in fact, first folios to be illustrated in this manuscript. And it is about the story of Geyumars. This is the court of Geyumars, essentially. And Geyumars, as the text box tells us, and as we understand from the stories by the poet Ferdowsi, who composed what is the longest epic poem and amongst the most important literary monuments, world monuments, really, the Shanahme, is that this was the legendary king, the first legendary king. And the text gives us a sense of Geyumars, who became the king of the worlds. He first built his residence in the mountains. His prosperity and his palace rose from the mountains, and he and his people wore leopard pelts. Cultivation began from him, and the garments and food were ample and fresh. The text doesn't tell us exactly what is depicted, nor the artists are in fact representing what the text says. And that is one of the key aspects of looking at Persian painting, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, where these are not illustrations of a text, a story, but rather complements to the story. The Shanahme was written in the 11th century, at the end of the 10th, early 11th century, but it is recopied and copied and copied again and again by four royal patrons over the course of centuries across a vast area where Persian language was the lingua franca of high culture, essentially. So each time the manuscript is copied and indeed graced with these paintings, it is a new and timely and contemporary interpretation of the story within that time frame. Here we see Geyumars seated as if floating in the midst of this mountain structure. It's hard to call it a structure. These are floating figures, and indeed, if I get closer, you might even see not only those magnificent costumes, but also the details of faces in the rock formations, and a large number of details of natural phenomena in plant forms, animals, and indeed in terms of the juxtaposition of what is a mimetic, clearly a mimetic observation of nature, and the abstracted and imaginary construction of a vision, really, as it were. And to really see the magnificence of this luminous painted surfaces, the extraordinary details, and to remember that these are minute in size, that it is indeed that kind of looking in and closely and lingering on the details That is the goal of the artist, and really the ultimate sort of expression of what these Persian paintings aim to do. So they tell the story, of course, they complement the story, they place it within its time period. It is related to the expression and self-representation of the reigning monarch, and in relation to a long history of kingship, Iranian kingship, by way of the legendary kings like Geyumars, but also historical ones that form part of the Shanahme as well. Here, the artist, the principal artist of this painting, by the name of Sultan Muhammad, down here I have put all those little texts that I thought if I take my time to ask you to look, you might also have time to, in fact, read some of this. It's about Sultan Muhammad, the artist, who a court librarian, royal librarian, Dost Muhammad, writes in 1544. This is an art historical document, if you will, which emerges in the 16th century in Iran, just as it does in, for instance, Europe. It's in that document that he says about Sultan Muhammad, artist of this folio. And we only know that not because Sultan Muhammad signed this page, but because of what Dost Muhammad tells us. He says, first is the rarity of the age, Master Sultan Muhammad, who has developed the depiction to such a degree that although it has 1,000 eyes, that is, depiction has 1,000 eyes, the celestial sphere, or no, celestial sphere has 1,000 eyes. The celestial sphere has not seen his like. Among his creations, depicted in His Majesty's Shanahme, that is this Shanahme, is a scene of people wearing leopard skins. It is such that the lion-hearted of the jungle of depiction and the leopards and crocodiles of the workshop of ornamentation quail at the fangs of his pen and bend their necks before the awesomeness of the pictures. It's really in that kind of a, you know, you have to unpack such statements. It's not as if we have a biography of Sultan Muhammad, but it's in these kinds of critical reflections on the artist's work and the way his brush, here mentioned as a pen, has acquired the status of the pen, actually, which in the Islamic context is the instrument for writing and therefore connected to reproduction of the word of God, as in the Quran. But here, the pen of the artist, the brush of the artist, acquires that kind of a level of status comparable to the pen of the calligrapher. It's in this painting that once one begins to look at it, and it's one of those paintings that cannot be seen behind a glass, cannot be seen hung on a wall properly, that you can also see those dramas that unfold in corners, in different parts of the painting, where you can hear the clambering of these monkeys in the trees hanging over the box of text. Actually, it's this magic, the very extraordinary capacity for the viewer to switch from reading to looking, from such details as the heads hidden in the rocks as if they are witnesses to the event, to actual monkeys playing in the mountains and so forth. It's that makes this play of visual and textual and the story and the extra textual images and their reference come to life, in fact, in a page such as the Court of Geyumars. The other one I wanted to focus on, and this one is in the exhibition and really well worth going, even if you go just for this page, although the whole exhibition is fantastic. This too is attributed to Sultan Muhammad, and indeed to the other artist, Mir Sayed Ali, who also is referenced by Dost Muhammad as the Sayyid of the immaculate brush, the unique among the nations. Here, that close looking is required by, or actually put in place by the very fact that you turn pages. So when you look at a page such as this, which is part of a double page, obviously, this is a crucial aspect, is to remember that you read and slowly come to the paintings, and the paintings are not illustrating what one reads, but rather evoking and complementing and complicating, in fact, the stories, some of which are only or not needed to have a text to know, but are memorized and are immediately recognizable. That process of turning the page reveals this page, like the Court of Guimars and like many other of these pages, to really shimmer in front of the light as the page turns. It's there that you begin to see the complex patterns that are juxtaposed in seemingly repetitive motifs, like these horses' backs here as they are rushing out of the painting, or the faces and shields that mark one side while the other side is rushing in this very loud battle scene, looking like frozen in time, but in fact, given those kinds of energies that come with one reconstructing in one's mind's eye and hearing in one's mind the activities, to notice the musicians up here playing with as much energy as possible, blowing into the horns and banging onto the drums, to notice this is a night scene. Actually, everything looks bright and clear, and as if none of them have a roundness, a shadow, or that there is a directed light, but rather it's the completeness of the picture that then the mind reconstructs. In other words, they are not descriptive. There is no real sort of mimetic representation, not because they didn't know how to do it, but because that was the choice, that you do not describe, but you evoke through these paintings. That is part of really looking at Persian painting through the lens of a cultural habit of looking, a cultural habit of reading images, actually, and to notice how the light of the moon and the stars are just as importantly bright as the rest of the picture, while this is indeed a night scene. To note the sound of the horses running, the drama of what is essentially the victory of the Iranian king over his arch enemy, the Turanian king, and to always be alert to the fact that the details are very small, that you cannot stand back and look at these, need to be very close and look at them by way of both zeroing in on details, sort of traversing and transitioning from one segment to another, to notice the fact that the angel hovering upside down over this scene of what is essentially a murder scene is so sweetly in a corner, and it's no more than maybe a centimeter in height, and that the rest of the details describe for us a scene, a fully developed palace scene, inside of it, outside of it, with all the attendants and so forth. So the point about this is that they require a different habit of looking, actually. And it is there that I want to say that a manuscript like the Shanahme of Shah Tahmasp, which has a large number of paintings bordering to 200 or so, is indeed carried out, masterminded, planned by a group of artists, librarians, and with the sort of input, if you will, of the patron, in the same manner as the program in the Sistine Chapel may be conceived, or other programs of visual production that we are accustomed to. The scale is small, but that, and the manner of approach is different, but that's because there are different habits of reading and looking and experiencing the materiality of the object itself. So ultimately, what really is embedded in looking at the paintings, such as the Court of Gayumars or the battle scene in Sarikhani collection, is that you would have had it not been for the fact that they are beyond our reach, you would have had the chance to actually touch the surfaces as well and feel the sort of the thickness of pigments, to feel the places where gold has been used and the gold has been tooled. So it's this complexity that is part of our thinking. And while I can understand perhaps a great deal of what is the iconographic and the storytelling and the technological representational qualities of works in 16th century contemporary of Sultan Muhammad, Mir Sayyid Ali, in Michelangelo, Raphael, Hieronymus Bosch, and so forth, it would bear fruit for us to decenter and really turn our attention towards those contemporaries elsewhere. And it's not just the Persian paintings, but it's also Ottoman works and Ming paintings and Mughal paintings and so forth. I'm just giving an example really in the end of what seems to be to me a range of 16th century, early 16th century arts. And on that level, I wish we could have all gathered together and had a festivity with music and food and drinks and so forth. But that's the end of my little presentation. And thank you.
Thank you all for coming very much, and to Sussan. It was a really beautiful
Pleasure.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you all. Good night.
Bye.